Hey guys, today we'll be going over CRCP versus JCP and getting a general understanding of what these two topics are. Our outline will discuss the title slide, outline. Slides 3 to 5 will talk about CRCP. Slides 6 to 8 will discuss JCP. Slide 9 will discuss costs and cost differences. Slide 10 will include some safety hazards that we need to discuss over these two topics. Slide 11 will be a test your knowledge, just making sure that we're following along correctly and that we know what's going on. Slide 12 we will discuss differences between our topics. Slide 13 is a summary. And slide 14 we'll just talk about our resources for the day. So going over first, we'll talk about CRCP and what it is. If you're unfamiliar with CRCP, it's continuous reinforced concrete pavement. Over to the right, you guys will get a good visual image of what you're looking at when we're talking about CRCP. Continuous reinforced concrete pavements is a type of concrete pavement that does not require any transverse contraction joints. CRCP is a concrete pavement reinforced with continuous steel bars throughout its length. Over to the right in the image, you'll be able to see that through the longitudinal joint and how it's spanning over the length of the distance right here. I'll highlight it for you guys. And lastly, they demonstrate superior long-term performance. Typical design service lives are 30 to 40 years, and they show great cost effectiveness. So continuing on with CRCP, we'll be talking about the design in this slide. Its design illuminates the need for transverse joints and keeps cracks tight together, resulting in a continuous smooth riding surface that is ultimately maintenance-free. Reinforcing steel is used in combinations with other design properties such as slab thickness and concrete materials to prevent environmental distresses. Transverse cracks in CRCP are typically 1.5 to 6 feet apart. Other benefits of tight cracks include minimal faulting, reduced potential for water penetration, and it's more difficult for harmful chlorides and other corrosive agents to reach into the steel. Continuing on with CRCP, steel is important to the design and performance of CRCP. It must be placed at the proper level while the concrete is placed around it. The most common method for steel placement is installing the steel in placers by hand before paving. The system of the steel reinforcement chairs and transverse steel bars must be secure enough to ensure that it does not move as the concrete is poured around the steel, either by hand or by a slip form paver. Alright, moving forward, now we're going on to JCP. JCP is joint reinforced pavement. Joint reinforced concrete pavements contain steel mesh reinforcement or distributed steel. Designers intentionally increase the joint spacing and include reinforcing steel to hold together mid-panel crackings. And over to the right, you'll see a great demonstration of how the cracking occurs dead center along that 25 to 30 foot span. Continuing on with JCP, we'll be discussing the design of it now. Transverse joints spaced at regular intervals, like we talked about in the last slide, typically 25 to 30 feet. It can differ depending upon the project. Transverse joints used to control temperature-induced contraction and expansion. So when the weather changes, here in Texas, we're pretty much year-round the same, so it's not too big here, but if you were to be at a different state, different location, and you'll see extreme weather changes through the summer and winter, this wouldn't be a bad option. You'll see the smooth dowel bars used at transverse joints for load transfer. The image should demonstrate that for you guys right here will be the dowel bars, be right here located in the center. And lastly, the transverse joints spaced at 15-foot intervals. A lot of the times this design is used in parking lots, around big stores, commercial stores, Walmart, Targets, you name it. Moving forward with JCP, where to use it. As I talked about in the last slide, it's going to be used in roadways controlled and maintained by another government entity. It's an aesthetic reason where pedestrian traffic might interrupt the randomly spaced cracks of CRCP with premature failure. Like I said, it'll be in parking areas, roadways, crosswalks, sidewalks, things of that nature. Now we'll be jumping into the costs of CRCP and JCP. We'll be comparing the differences between the two. JCP pavement compared to CRCP. CRCP tends to be more expensive. This is due to the use of more steel. Steel is an expensive product, expensive material. Using more of it, obviously, you're going to be paying more to get the job done. So depending on the scale of the project, prices do vary. Typically, what I've seen to find is that about 20 to 30% more in CRCP projects, just due to the steel, than that JCP design. Next, we'll be going over the safety procedures. This is for ultimately both CRCP and JCP. Doesn't really matter which one you're doing. So number one is check equipment safety when working with the concrete. Concrete packs a lot of weight, therefore your equipment must be in top condition. Formwork and shoring equipment need to not cause failure. That'll be huge. If your formwork fails, then your concrete pavement slides out, and then you have a huge mess to fix later on. Make sure your workers use safety gear when working in concrete. It's important that you enforce the wearing of safety gear. Make sure they aren't any exposed areas of the skin that could be subject to chemical burns from cement. All workers should wear goggles to protect against a splash that could cause permanent damage in their eyes. All workers should be wearing proper safety helmet and vest, of course. Another one I wanted to touch on is protection from other concrete safety hazards. The nature of your job site can bring its own hazards. Therefore, it's a good idea to know areas of extreme heights when you're working on a highway or something of this sort. You definitely need to make these areas aware for your workers just to prevent any injuries. And these aren't all the safety procedures. These are just a few that I highlighted that I thought were important to go over. This is just a little test your knowledge, just to see if you guys have been paying attention a little bit. So it says, what is the most common method for steel placement installation before placing or pouring pavement? That was what we discussed earlier on, probably with slide 3 or 4. You're going to want to use it, it's going to be by hand. You want to make sure everything's secured by hand. That's going to be one of the best ways for steel placement installation. So our main differences, the biggest difference in design considerations is the reinforcing steel. That's what we saw in the cost as well. The steel in CRCP is typically between 1/3 and 1/2 the slab thickness as measured from the pavement surface. Steel that is placed too close to the surface will be more susceptible to corrosion, while steel placed too deep will not be effective in maintaining tight crack widths. The concrete is intended to bond to the reinforcing steel to help provide resistance to the cracks widening. This too is a difference from the dowels in JCP, as bonding with the dowel bars can lock up the joints. So moving forward into our takeaway or summary, our conclusion into this, what I really wanted you guys to focus on is just knowing what these two topics are. A lot of people aren't familiar with the acronyms for CRCP or JCP. So again, CRCP is a concrete pavement in which the longitudinal reinforcing steel is continuous for its length, and there's no transverse joints other than construction joints that are installed. That'll be huge. And then JCP, the transverse joints are spaced at regular intervals and used to control temperature-induced contraction and expansion. Smooth dowel bars used at transverse joints for load transfer. Alrighty guys, we'll be wrapping this thing up here. On this slide, all you have is my resources. A lot of these resources are going to be using edu, governmentsites.org. It'll be a lot of good resources for you guys just to look back through if you want to check it out. Alrighty guys, and before we end today's lesson over CRCP versus JCP, if you have any questions, feel free to comment below. I'll try to get back to you the best I can. Appreciate it, guys.